Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame Anandamayi Chaitanyamayi Satyamayi Parame Satyamayi Parame Satyamayi Parame Satyam Jnanam Satyam Jnanam Jyotir Aurobindo Satyam Jnanam Satyam Jnanam Jyotir Aurobindo Satyam Jnanam Satyam Jnanam Jyotir Aurobindo. So the title of our talk is God Alone Is, I Am Not. When Mother was asked, Mother, what is it that will help me always remember that I'm living a spiritual life? Mother answers, the awareness of the divine presence in all things and always. Very beautiful. Somebody asks, what will remind me that I'm living a spiritual life? And the mother says, the awareness of the divine presence in all things and always. But how do we actually do this? When can we really remember that everything is the divine? It's when, you know, in the Upanishads there's a beautiful phrase, chakshushcha chakshu, the eye behind the eye. So there's an eye behind our physical eye, metaphorically. When that opens, I really see that I am not what I think I am, and that everything else is also not what it appears to me. To my eyes, I'm separate from Bijal Shashi, I'm separate from Agam, I'm separate from everyone. But when that inner eye, the eye behind the eye opens, I see that I'm not really this Nam Roop Gun, and nor is that the Nam Roop Gun. And I see everything as one continuum of God. So when I look through the eyes of my ego, my understanding that everything is God will always be at a very mental level, and so something not really very living. It's only when I really go within, and that inner vision opens. When the ego drops, the inner vision cannot open without the ego dropping. Somewhere we maybe have parameters of spiritual growths as our capacity to see visions, tune into planes, but the most fundamental necessity of spiritual life is how less identified I am with my ego sense. That's the real parameter, because the more I'm identified with the ego, the more I see myself as separate from the whole. And when there's that separation, it'll just be a thought. I'm not really seeing God in everything. So, these are words from Sri Aurobindo's synthesis of yoga. The self of man must be made one with the self of all. The self of the finite individual must pour itself into the boundless finite, and that into the boundless infinite it should be, and that cosmic spirit too must be exceeded in the transcendent infinite. We'll just check whether it's boundless finite or boundless infinite. Okay? The self of man must be made one with the self of all. The self of the finite individual must pour itself into the boundless finite or infinite, and that cosmic spirit too must be exceeded in the transcendent infinite. This cannot be done without an uncompromising abolition of the ego sense at its very basis and source. So we cannot do this without the abolition of the ego sense at its very basis and source. In the path of knowledge, one attempts this abolition negatively by a denial of the reality of the ego, positively by a constant fixing of the thought upon the idea of the one and the infinite in itself, or the one and infinite everywhere. So in the path of knowledge, Sri Aurobindo says this ego self can be abolished by constantly, positive way is the yes way, constantly reminding myself that everything is God. And negatively it is done by constantly reminding myself that I don't exist. So God alone is, I am not. Okay, so in Sufis there's this beautiful phrase, La ilaha illallah. So La ilaha is it simply means no God but God. But deeper down it means I am not. La ilaha. No, La ilaha is God alone is. Illallah is I am not. I am not. God alone is. So just try this. It's a beautiful feeling. Just shut your eyes. Connect with that sense in your heart. The presence of the mother in your heart. And breathe in, mentally saying in the heart, God alone is. Breathe out, saying, I am not. Do this for a minute or so. God alone is. As you breathe in, exhaling the sense of I am not. And then open your eyes, and every now and then make this a practice, just mentally saying God alone is, as you inhale, breathing out saying I am not. And if you can do this a lot of the day, somewhere, see these phrases, if I do it mentally, we were discussing in our class this morning that there are two intelligences in us, the sthul buddhi, the rational mind, and the sukshma buddhi, the intuitive subtle intelligence. Now, to the sthul buddhi, if I say God alone is, I'm not, no big deal, I'm bored of it. But the sukshma buddhi, the subtle intelligence inside us, somewhere recognizes the truth of these. You will feel like, I can't explain it. It doesn't make logical sense that God alone is, I'm not. How can I say I'm not? I'm here. But something in you will recognize the truth of it. So these are truths of the subtle intuitive intelligence, and the more you articulate them, the more the subtle intelligence breathes life into it and becomes your truth. So that's what Sri Aurobindo is saying here. In the path of knowledge, once one attempts this abolition of the ego negatively by a denial of the reality of the ego, I am not. Positively by constantly fixing of the thought upon the idea of the one, God alone is. This, if persistently done, changes in the end the mental outlook on oneself and the whole world. And there is a kind of mental realization. But afterwards, by degrees, or perhaps rapidly and imperatively, and almost at the beginning of the mental realization, deepens into spiritual experience. A realization in the very substance of our being. So it may start just as at a mental plane, but as we keep doing it, it ripens into a realization of our being. More and more frequent conditions come of something indefinable and illimitable. A peace, a silence, a joy, a bliss beyond expression, a sense of absolute impersonal power. This is the key word. Personal power tastes of the world, it tastes of the ego. It somewhere doesn't have a purity to it. But when power is impersonal, that's the real power. So when the ego dies, you open to this sense of impersonal power. A pure existence, a pure consciousness, an all-pervading presence. The ego persists in itself or in its habitual movements, but the place of the one becomes more and more loosened. One is the sense of I, the ahankar. The others are broken, crushed, more and more rejected, becoming weak in their intensity, limp or mechanical in their action. In the end, there is a constant giving up of the whole consciousness into the being of the Supreme. So just to share a personal experience in case it helps. Some time back there was a window which opened. I was a lot with the Sufi kalam, La ilaha illallah, no God but God, or sometimes just lapsing into God alone is, I am not. And it became almost a constant repetition in the background, and a window opened up where there was really a sense of the ego sense becoming thinner. I won't say it was gone, but it became very thin. And I remember that window was among the happiest times in my life. There was such a light feeling. There was, you really understand what Sri Aurobindo says when he says, wherever there is ignorance, there suffering too must come. And the fundamental ignorance is my sense of I or the ego. And whenever that thins, the kind of joy you experience, and it's a joy not caused by any object, not caused by anything anyone tells you or doesn't tell or do. And it's the most happiest flavor of joy. And that's what, when Sri Aurobindo says that if man could once taste the riches of spiritual treasures, I'm not quoting him verbatim, he would leave everything and want nothing but that. We keep desiring, I want to be loved, I want this, I want that, because we are exteriorized. The more exteriorized we are, the more desires we'll have. Because we've said it, no, deep down we know we are all bliss. So we cannot be content with an experience of blisslessness. So we are trying to fulfill desires to reach that bliss, but we are never going to reach it. The desires is just quenching your thirst with salt water. The more you drink, the thirstier you're going to be. But if we can really once experience that moment of the ego being thin, move from personal to impersonal. Personal joy is one thing, but when you experience that impersonal joy, it has a flavor incomparable to any joy you can get from objects or people or anything else. So, further, Sri Aurobindo says, there is a pushing back and rending or a rushing down of the walls that imprisoned our conscious being. There is a loss of all sense of individuality and personality, of all placement in space or time, or action and law of nature. There is no longer an ego, a person definite and definable, but only consciousness, only existence, only peace or bliss. One becomes immortality, becomes eternity, becomes infinity. All that is left of the personal soul is a hymn of peace and freedom and bliss vibrating somewhere in the eternal. All that is left of the personal soul is a hymn of peace and freedom and bliss vibrating somewhere in the eternal. Further, from the Synthesis of Yoga, for our real self, this is the passage we worked with in our yoga class in the morning, for our real self is not the individual mental being. That is only a figure, an appearance. Our real self is cosmic, infinite. It is one with all existence and the inhabitant of all existences. The self behind our mind, life and body is the same as the self behind the mind, life and body of all our fellow beings. And if we come to possess it, we shall naturally, when we turn to look out again upon them, tend to become one with them in the common basis of our consciousness. So in simple words, what Sri Aurobindo is saying is that we live with a concept of ourself, our mental being, our ego. But behind the ego, there is a self. And this self is the same as the self behind everyone. So what's me in my deepest is the same that's the deepest in all beings. And Sri Aurobindo says when we touch that self, immediately we feel one with everyone. Now, there are gradations. We may not instantly feel this oneness. But when that, I'm talking about that period, which unfortunately I don't have access to, it was a window which opened and shut. But when I had access to that window, it's not that I felt exactly one with everyone because I hadn't reached there. But there's a great softening towards everyone. There's a complete no judgment. whatever a person does, you observe it without judging it, and there's a great softness, great compassion, great love, and it's not thought of. You don't tell yourself, I'm sending metta to her, I'm doing it, just arises. So all those are flavors of the self when you start feeling oneness with people. When consciousness is no longer totally absorbed by thinking, some of it remains in its formless, unconditioned original state. Oh, these are words of Eckhart Tolle. We finished with Sri Aurobindo. When consciousness is no longer totally absorbed by thinking, some of it remains in its formless, unconditioned original state. This is the inner space. Normally, our consciousness is fully absorbed by thought. We are not aware of anything in us apart from thought. But when we can become aware of the awareness space behind thought, something that is observing thoughts, something that's outside thought, that's the inner space. That's the self behind the mental being. Space consciousness means that in addition to being conscious of thing, which always comes down to sense perceptions, thoughts and emotions, there is an undercurrent of awareness. I'm reading this again. Space consciousness means that in addition to being conscious of things, which always comes down to space perceptions, thoughts and emotions, there is an undercurrent of awareness. Something that is aware that I am outside thoughts. Awareness implies that you are not only conscious of things, objects, but you are also conscious of being conscious. If you can sense an alert inner stillness in the background while things happen in the foreground, that's it. This dimension is there in everyone, but most people are completely unaware of it. This is the fundamental ignorance. Wherever there is ignorance, that suffering too must come. As long as we are not aware of this, little things will keep triggering us. Sometimes I point to it by saying, can you feel your own presence? Space consciousness represents not only freedom from ego, but also from dependency on things of this world, from materialism and materiality. It is the spiritual dimension which alone can give transcendent and true happiness to this world. Full stop, not question mark. So now there was a question put to Tolle, Eckhart Tolle. How do you let go of attachment to things? Take it as attachment to a desire. It could be a desire for objects, desire to be loved, desire for people, desire for circumstances to change. So the question is, how do you let go of attachment to things? And Tolle replies, don't even try. Don't even try to let go of attachment to things. It is impossible. Attachment to things drop away. Attachment to things drops away by itself when you no longer seek to find yourself in them. This is an interesting sentence. Attachment to things drop away when you no longer seek to find yourself in them. Let's just contemplate, what does this mean? When will you no longer seek to find yourself in them? When you are seeking to find yourself in something else. See, one way is we are always seeking to find ourselves in our thoughts, right? We are trying to find out how we are in our thoughts. How am I? How do I appear? What will I do? But when you become aware of the awareness space behind thought, the observer, and when there's that voice in your head of thoughts in the foreground, and there's the stillness in the background which is observing. Right now, all I know is this voice in the foreground. So I think that is all I am. So I'm looking to find myself in that voice in the foreground. But if I have the grace of becoming aware of the stillness in the background, and believe me, a taste of that is a taste of blood. It is so freeing that you start losing interest in this voice in the foreground. You're not really interested in what it's saying, what it's telling you about yourself, what it's telling you about the world. You're not looking to find yourself in them. And when that happens, you automatically get detached from, after all, desire is in thought, right? If you start losing interest in thought, you'll start losing interest in objects of desires which are in the thought, right?
Are we allowed to ask a question?
Of course, of course.
Does it happen that sometimes you realize that this is just a thought, it's a movie, it's moving?
Yeah.
And so you've taken that step back and you're seeing from another eye, this is just a thought. But then before you know it, you've become one with the thought. And again you...
Yes.
And then again you step out.
Yes.
And you tell yourself, no.
Yes.
This is another eye, see from like God, he has a space. But then before you know it, again you step into that. So
Avisha, I'll repeat the question. Your question is that a thought comes. You have heard from somebody that you are not the thought. So that thought will make the first thought lose. But the next thought will come, and the next thought. So at some level, it's not enough to know it on the mental plane. You have to make it experiential. That is, a thought comes. Let's try it now. Come, let's sit up straight. Firstly, this step from thinking to awareness, in my experience, only comes as a gift of grace. The window that opens, that takes you to awareness, is a gift of grace. We are sitting in this place for which Mother has given the message that in this house, anyone who comes with a real aspiration, the aspiration will be answered. So as we sit here, let's just collectively aspire for that gift, to be able to step from thinking into awareness. So stay focused in the heart center or the overhead, wherever you can connect better. And just watch thoughts. In fact, if focusing on the centers is a distraction because it will again strengthen your sense of I, don't focus anywhere. Just watch thoughts as they come and go. Don't add or subtract anything to the thought. Just watch it like a movie. Don't tell yourself it's a movie. Do it. Watch it like a movie. Recognize that the I in the thought is not really you. You are the impersonal awareness space in which thoughts come and go. Pay more attention to that awareness space behind thoughts than the thought itself. And let's just stay quiet for a minute with this. If naturally as you do this, your awareness shifts overhead or in the heart, let it. But you don't pay attention, you don't make an effort to keep your focus in either of these two places. Pay more attention to awareness than thought. Be more interested in the subject than the object. The subject is awareness, the object is thought, and the I in the thought. Be more interested in the impersonal I, which is awareness, than the personal I of the ego sense and the thoughts. And slowly open your eyes whenever you're ready. Did you get some glimpse?
I felt I was in and out.
Huh.
But I was more in than this.
Huh. So it's not just a thought that, oh, this is a movie, I must step out of it. That's mental. It's the experience which is more important. But that mental thought process is important. It's a beginning. But let it deepen into trying to actually experience it. If you are aware that you are identified with a thing, the identification is no longer total. I am the awareness that is aware that there is attachment. That's the beginning of the transformation of consciousness. When you're no longer identified, okay, these are words of John Klein, who was from Tiruvannamalai, writes beautifully on the quest for the I. When you are no longer identified with the person, how is life affected? When you are no longer identified with your sense of I, when you're not living as an ego, how is life affected? The first thing you notice is how much richer and deeper your perceptions are. Communication becomes so much more varied. Generally, we are fixed in patterns of communication, but when we live in openness, a great sensitivity arises. A sensitivity we never dreamed of. Openness is in awareness, impersonality. When we approach our surroundings from wholeness, our whole structure comes alive. We do not hear music with the ears only. When the ears cease to grasp sound for themselves, we feel music with our whole body. The color, the form, the vibration, it no longer belongs to a specific organ. It belongs to our whole being. He's made a very interesting observation, and some of us must have experienced it. When the ears are not grasping sound, oh, this music is so beautiful, I want to hear it. When there's no eye behind the ears to grasp sound, it's as if you hear sound with your whole being. And you hear things which you won't hear with the physical ear. Only in it belongs to our whole being. This creates a deep humility and innocence. Why does he say humility and innocence? What has awareness got to do with humility and innocence? What takes away our innocence? Our sense of I, our ahankar, right? When a baby is small and he doesn't have the sense of I, he often refers to himself in the third person, no? He'll say, give something to Baba or give something to baby. He's referring to himself, but he won't say give me, because that ahankar hasn't come. And that's why babies are so lovable and so pure, because that sense of I hasn't come in yet. So when that sense of I releases, then there is an innocence. Then there's a humility. It's the I which makes us arrogant in different ways. Even if we feel we are no good, it's the opposite end of arrogance. But either way, it's the I that makes us that. When the I becomes more impersonal, it's a return to innocence. It's a return to humility. And that's why Shiva, who's pure consciousness, they say, no, the God we see sitting on Mount Kailash is Shankar. But Shiva is not a form, it's an essence. It's pure consciousness, it's stillness. And therefore Shiva is called Bholenath, the Lord of the innocent, because it's a consciousness which is completely innocent of the I. So, only in humility, that is without that sense of I, is true communication possible. Then one lives in a completely new dimension. To live as a personality is to live in restriction. Don't live in restriction. Let the personality live in you. Right now we are living in the ego. But he's saying let the ego live in you. That means you recognize that you're much vaster than the ego. In living in the environment without separation, there is great, great beauty. That's when the chakshushcha chakshu, the eye behind the eye, opens. One is the, that's why what is that mantra? Om Trayambakam Yajamahe, Mahamrutyunjay mantra. Om Trayambakam Yajamahe, we are praying to Shiva, O Lord Shiva, with the third eye. The two eyes are the eyes of duality. They make me see ego, separation. But the Trayambak, the third eye, the eye of Shiva, is when it opens, that's the chakshushcha chakshu, the eye behind the eye. That's when we see non-duality. That's when we see the whole world free from separation, free from the sense of I. And that's when we see great, great beauty. And that's when, you know, some classes back we did the Bhadram chant, that let me see everything as auspicious as God. We'll rarely see that with our two eyes. When this inner vision, the chakshushcha chakshu opens, that's when we see this great, great beauty. Therefore, there's that famous Sanskrit saying Satyam Shivam Sundaram. Truth is beauty, is God. When we come to this truth of ourselves and we see everything from that truth makes us see everything as beautiful. There's no ugliness that we can see anymore. And that is God. Satyam Shivam Sundaram. So, John Klein further. Would you talk more about humility in human relations? Humility, John Klein says, is not something you wear like a garment. It has nothing to do with bowed head and averted eyes. It comes from the reabsorption of individuality in being, in stillness. It comes from the ending of all agitation. In attention, alertness, there is humility. It is receptivity, openness to all that life brings. Where there is no psychological memory, no accumulation of knowledge, there is innocence. Innocence is humility. I'll just read this again. Can't explain it, just feel the words. Humility is not something you wear like a garment. It has nothing to do with bowed heads and averted eyes. It comes from the reabsorption of individuality in being, in stillness. It comes from the ending of all agitation. In attention, alertness, there is humility. It is receptivity, openness to all that life brings. Where there is no psychological memory, no accumulation of knowledge, there is innocence. Innocence is humility. Where there is no ego, there is innocence and there is humility. In intimate or problematic situations, each must speak in humility of how they feel. It is simply a statement of facts with no justification, no interpretation. So, in intimate or problematic situations, suppose, take a situation, you go to a restaurant and you're served cold soup. If you're in the state of awareness, you'll just call to the waiter and tell the waiter the soup is cold, statements of facts. The waiter will get you warm soup. But if you're in the ego and you're already always is, the world is a bad place, nobody treats me right, you'll call the waiter and yell, the soup is cold, how can you serve me cold soup, how dare you do this, blah blah blah. So you see how futile that reaction is, whereas when applied to anything, a loved one didn't do something you needed that person to do. When you're in an egoistic state, your past will speak. You're not present to the moment. The moment is only the pure fact. What you needed to be done wasn't done. But your ego will step into it and make a big story. I'm never treated right. I'm not loved, blah, blah, blah. But if I'm not identified with the ego, if I'm just pure awareness, I'll just look at facts. Okay, the person hasn't done what needed to be done. Now what's the solution? The ego makes things into a problem. Otherwise, when I'm with awareness, there are just situations to be dealt with, which you'll deal with. But the moment your ego steps in, that's when the problem comes. So, in intimate or problematic situations, each must speak in humility of how they feel. It is simply a statement of facts with no justification, no interpretation. We must not look for a conclusion. If we allow the situation complete freedom from evaluation and judgment and pressure to find a conclusion, many things appear which do not belong to our memory. Humility arises when there's no reference to an I. This emptiness is the healing factor in any situation. This emptiness is the healing factor in any situation. So beautifully, it's been said that the greatest cure even for the physical body is a silent mind. The moment you come to silence, the body heals. And to my mind, you can't really come to a real silence till the ego thins. Because so long as there's the ego, you'll keep thinking. The I is the first thought, and then you generate thoughts around it. Before the I, there is perception. But when the I comes in, the perception is made into a judgment and a thought. No? We've discussed that manas, buddhi, ahankar. Manas is pure perception. Buddhi is the judgment of it. And then the ego sense comes in. Every judgment will create an ego sense. An I which likes or dislikes what you perceive. So if you stop at manas, pure perception, no judgment and so no ego, then no buddhi or hankar comes in, then you come to awareness. So John Klein says the origin of all lack is feeling isolated. That means you lack when you're very identified with the ego. Then you are no longer nourished by the whole. But when the ego thins, you're nourished by the whole. Coming to Savitri, beautiful, beautiful lines. It's from where Savitri is coming into the discovery of her real self. She's at the threshold of it. It's page 5. Do you have your mobile? You can download the PDF. All this is there. Okay, lovely. So it's page 522. Whatever John Klein has said, it's so beautifully said in these words. An innocent and holy ignorance, adored like one who worships formless God. The unseen light she could not claim nor own. Now Savitri has had the highest spiritual experiences by now. But at the end of all those spiritual experiences, she's come to this. An innocent and holy, innocent because her sense of I has become very thin. She is innocent of the sense of I. And holy ignorance because suddenly she's reached a point where she's understood that she can't understand anything through thoughts. She has seen that very clearly. So it's an ignorance. I can't know anything through my thinking mind. So an innocent and holy ignorance, adored like one who worships formless God. Now, even a form of the mother or whatever is a thought, right? Savitri has come to a point where all thought has gone. So there's no image, no form, but yet she's in a state of utter love, but she doesn't know what she's loving. It's a faceless face. An innocent and holy ignorance, adored like one who worships formless God. The unseen light she could not claim nor own. The ego and thought makes claim, mother is mine, whatever. But she's come to the brink of such thoughtlessness that it's an unseen light. She can't even see it. She can't claim it. She's very clear she can't own it. The unseen light she could not claim nor own. In a simple purity of emptiness, empty of thought, empty of ego, her mind knelt down before the unknowable. So that's the origin of the term Upanishad. What is Upanishad? Upa, sitting near the feet of the Guru. Upanishad literally means that. And it's a reminder that the Upanishad reveals its truth to you when your thinking mind becomes humble. When it says that, yeah, I'll never know the truth with my thoughts. So it drops down in humility to the Guru in the heart and says, now I'll only know if you reveal it. I can't think this out. So that's when the truth of Upanishad reveals itself. You can never know it through thought. In a simple purity of emptiness, her mind knelt down before the unknowable. All was abolished save her naked self free of the clothes of ego. That's the symbolism of Krishna stealing the clothes of the gopis. The clothes represent the appearances, our ego, and Krishna is always, you know the story, when they are bathing, he takes away their clothes. Krishna is the supreme Godhead in us, which takes away the appearances, the ego sense, till our naked self is there. All was abolished save her naked self, and the prostrate is lying down as if like a person's doing Shashtang Namaskar, the prostrate yearning of her surrendered heart. There was no strength in her, no pride of force. There was no, mother, you must do this, you must give me that. All that had gone. There was no strength in her, no pride of force. The lofty burning of desire had sunk. Lofty is big, tall. Desire is like a lofty burning in us. But that had sunk. Ashamed, a vanity of a separate self. The moment a flavor of desire came, it made her feel ashamed. How can I feel separate enough from the one to desire? Ashamed, a vanity of separate self. The hope of spiritual greatness fled. Whenever we meditate or whatever, we have some spiritual ambition. But she reached a stage of such utter humility that even the hope of spiritual greatness fled. Salvation she asked not, nor a heavenly crown. She didn't ask for anything. There was nothing in her that could ask for anything. Humility seemed now too proud a state. Only Sri Aurobindo can write a sentence like this. Humility, as we human beings know it, seemed now too proud a state. Herself was nothing. God alone was all. God alone is, I am not. She had reached that. Herself was nothing. God alone was all. Yet God she knew not, but only knew He was. So beautiful. In that state, you don't know what God is, but you only knew He was. I'm reading this whole passage without explanation. Just feel it in your being. An innocent and holy ignorance, adored like one who worships formless God, the unseen light she could not claim nor own. In a simple purity of emptiness, her mind knelt down before the unknowable. All was abolished save her naked self and the prostrate yearning of her surrendered heart. There was no strength in her, no pride of force. The lofty burning of desire had sunk. Ashamed a vanity of separate self, the hope of spiritual greatness fled. Salvation she asked not, nor a heavenly crown. Humility seemed now too proud a state. Herself was nothing. God alone was all. Yet God she knew not, but only knew He was. Page 451, Savitri. Bliss is Godhead's crown, eternal, free, unburdened by life's blind mystery of pain. So somewhere else in Savitri there's this beautiful line, a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. So the body, mind, emotion mechanism is a machine. It goes on by the mechanical working of Prakriti or nature. But behind this brute is animal, it's like an animal. But behind this brute machine, a Godhead stands. So bliss is this Godhead's crown, eternal, free, unburdened by life's blind mystery of pain. So that self that we are behind the mental being is unburdened by life's blind mystery of pain. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. So beautiful. It's like wherever there's pain, there's a signature. You know a painting by the signature of the artist, right? If pain is a painting, always its signature will be ignorance, because you cannot have pain without some fundamental ignorance. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting, proving the secret God denied by life. Until life finds Him, pain can never end. So beautiful. Pain is a constant goad to find the secret God that we are. Marvelous lines. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. Until life finds Him, pain can never end. So when you're in pain, instead of doing all the other things we do, fighting with people, lashing out, or whipping ourselves or whatever else, just remind yourself that pain can never, this beautiful line, until life finds Him, pain can never end. The pain is a goad to you to look for the God inside you. The moment you find it, pain releases. Yes?
I have a question. In this case, God, G is small and H is small. Is this the God, as in which God? As in the God?
The secret God. See, it's a God you're not conscious of. So He's kept it small. The secret God denied by life. Sri Aurobindo is, he puts it God. See here, few lines down, not God's whole, G is capital.
Yeah.
So this is secret God.
So probably he refers to the God within, not any kind of form.
Yeah, but that still would not diminish the G to a small g, because even the God within is God. Yeah, frankly, that's my thought. I can't be sure of it. I've noticed this many places he puts G small, many places he puts it big. We'll have to ask Sri Aurobindo why. But attesting the secret God denied by life. So whenever there's pain, remember this line. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. The very fact that you have pain, it's proof that there's a God inside you which is waiting to be discovered. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. Until life finds Him, pain can never end. Calm is self's victory overcoming fate. So beautiful. This is such a gorgeous line. Fate can bring you many things which are difficult. If we are identified with our outer self, we'll react. But if we are identified with our deeper self, the God that stands behind the brute machine, whatever happens, we'll remain calm. And that calm is self's victory overcoming fate. Whatever life throws at me, I don't get triggered, because examine why you get triggered when things happen. Each of us has our specific triggers, right? Question yourself, why do I get triggered? Because that trigger threatens an image of myself, or I want to be something, but that trigger is stopping me from being that. I want to feel a person who's loved, but that trigger from the environment stops me from feeling loved, or whatever else. This is one example, it could be different things. Why does it trigger me? Because I'm identified with that ego self who wants to be loved, who wants to be treated a certain way. But if I'm not only invested in that ego self, if I'm already conscious of the awareness space behind that thought of the ego self, I'm not very bothered, right? I know that that person's behavior can't add or subtract anything to that still self I am. It can add or subtract from my ego self, but it can't add or subtract anything from the background stillness that I am. So I'm not affected by it. Whatever the person does, I'm not affected, because I'm not only invested there. That's what Eckhart Tolle says, don't even try to give up attachment, right? Because then you're still working in the ego plane. Just get disinterested in it and get more interested in that other dimension of yourself. Be more interested in the subject than the object. Calm is self's victory overcoming fate. Bear. So we see this in Satprem's life, right? We've quoted this example when there was an attempt to assassinate him, and the assassin had a gun straight pointed at him. Satprem says he fell into such a state of calm that there was not one vibration of fear in him. And the assassin just couldn't pull the trigger, he just trembled and ran away. So that's the power of stillness. I mean, there can't be a greater trigger than somebody trying to kill you, right? Whatever. Literal trigger. But if you stay with who you really are, not the phantom you that you think you are, then really it's true. Consciousness is the greatest protection. Nobody can do anything to you. Even if somebody is being unpleasant to you, but you are anchored in the calm, it's like that person has reached out to a handle to open the door, but the handle isn't there. Your ego is just not there to tango with it. So the person will eventually calm down, because there's nothing to tango with that person's ego. Calm is self's victory overcoming fate. Bear. Thou shalt find at last thy road to bliss. Bliss is the secret stuff of all that lives. Even pain and grief are garbs of world delight. It hides behind thy sorrow, thy cry, that self which is behind the mental self. Because thy strength is part and not God's whole. Your strength is part because it's the strength of your ego. So it's only a part, it's not God's whole. Because afflicted by the little self, he actually calls the ego an affliction, a disease. Because afflicted by the little self, Thy consciousness forgets to be divine as it walks in the vague penumbra. Penumbra is not a full shadow, a half-lit shadow. As it walks in the vague half-lit shadow, penumbra of the flesh, and cannot bear the world's tremendous touch. Beautifully said by Karen Miller, the world will break your heart in 100 ways. What are you going to do? All of us face this, right? The world breaks our heart in 100 ways. And the only way to deal with that is to reach that part of you which cannot be touched by the world, to which the world cannot add anything, to which the world cannot subtract anything. As it walks in the vague penumbra of the flesh and cannot bear the world's tremendous touch, thou criest out and sayest that there is pain. Because you can't bear the world's tremendous touch, because afflicted by the little self you forget to be divine, therefore you cry out and say that there is pain. Indifference, pain and joy, a triple disguise, attire of the rapturous dancer in the ways. The rapturous dancer is the God that you truly are. Withhold from thee the body of God's bliss. What keeps you away from the body of God's bliss that you are? Indifference, pain and joy, the triple disguise. Okay, now I'll just read this whole passage without explanation. Bliss is Godhead's crown, eternal, free, unburdened by life's blind mystery of pain. Pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. Until life finds him, pain can never end. Calm is self's victory, overcoming fate. Calm is self's victory, overcoming fate. Bear, thou shalt find at last thy road to bliss. Bliss is the secret stuff of all that lives. Even pain and grief are garbs of world delight. It hides behind thy sorrow and thy cry. Because thy strength is a part and not God's whole, because afflicted by the little self, thy consciousness forgets to be divine. As it walks in the vague penumbra of the flesh and cannot bear the world's tremendous touch, thou criest out and sayest that there is pain. Indifference, pain and joy, a triple disguise, attire of the rapturous dancer in the ways, withhold from thee the body of God's bliss. Page 476, Savitri. This is the whole program of yoga, the voice that speaks to Savitri. The voice replied, remember why thou camest. So that voice is telling all of us, why did you come on earth? Did you just come around to go on in your petty ways and keep getting entangled in your ego? Remember why thou camest. Find out thy soul. Recover thy hid self. Not this hurting, inconstant, changing self on the surface. That's not you, the voice is telling you. Recover thy hid self. In silence, seek God's meaning in thy depths. Then mortal nature change to the divine. Open God's door, enter into His trance. Cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light. Thought mimics light. Thought tells you you know, but really with thought you'll never know. Therefore, one meaning of the word Vedanta, Ved Anta, Vid is knowledge, Anta is end. The truth of Vedanta opens to you when you come to end of knowing with your thoughts. When you say that, yeah, with my thoughts I'll really not understand anything. So I'll stop understanding, I'll stop judging, and that's in fact a very powerful practice in Vedanta, to take it up that I'll try to understand nothing. For this 1 hour or these 2 hours, I'll live trying to understand nothing. And then the truth starts speaking when you come to the end of knowing with your thoughts. So thought is just a nimble ape of light. Cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light, in his tremendous hush, stilling thy brain. His vast truth awaken within, and know and see. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit's sight. Senses make you perceive everything, right? You hear words, you see things, and you come to judgments about them, and that veils the spirit's sight. So if you can stop at manas, just pure perception, the soup is cold, not build stories around it, I'm always treated badly, this restaurant is useless, the waiter is useless, none of all that, just pure facts. That will take me closer to the spirit's sight. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit's sight. In the enormous emptiness of thy mind, thou shalt see the eternal's body in the world. So beautiful. When that chakshushcha chakshu, the eye behind the eye, opens, when the vision of stillness, impersonal awareness opens, then I'll see the eternal's body in the world. I'll see everything as God. Then it will be a reality. God alone is, I am not. In the tremendous emptiness of thy mind, thou shalt see the eternal's body in the world. Know him in every voice heard by thy soul. In the world's contacts, meet his single touch. All things shall fold thee into his embrace. Conquer thy heart's throbs. Let thy heart beat in God. Right now my heart throbs with excitement or pain, excitement for pleasure, pain, aversion to painful experience. But conquer these heart throbs, aversion and attachment. Let thy heart beat in God. So when my heart beats in God, then I'm invincible, right? Because nobody has the power to make me happy or unhappy. I'm sourcing my happiness from that heartbeat in God. Conquer thy heart's throbs. Let thy heart beat in God. Thy nature shall be the engine of his works. Thy voice shall house the mightiness of his word. Then shalt thou harbour my force and conquer death. So I'll just read this without explanation, just feel it. Remember, the voice replied, remember why thou camest. Find out thy soul. Recover thy hid self. In silence, seek God's meaning in thy depths. Then mortal nature change to the divine. Open God's door, enter into his trance. cast thought from thee, that nimble ape of light, in his tremendous hush stilling thy brain, his vast truth awake within, and know and see. Cast from thee sense that veils thy spirit's sight, in the enormous emptiness of thy mind, thou shalt see the Eternal's body in the world, know him in every voice heard by thy soul, in the world's contacts meet his single touch, all things shall fold thee into his embrace. Conquer thy heart's throbs, let thy heart beat in God. This is thy nature shall be the engine of his works. Thy voice shall house the mightiness of his word. Then shalt thou harbor my force and conquer death. Any questions? Anything to share? If not, then we'll remain quiet and assimilate. The topic of our talk today was God alone is, I am not. In the synthesis of yoga, Sri Aurobindo says that the path of knowledge includes the positive way of constantly affirming to ourselves that all is God, and the negative way, negative as in saying no to something, is to constantly remind myself that I am not. I as the sense of ego, the ahankar, I don't exist. Only God exists. I too am the continuum of God which is everywhere. I have no separate existence from that continuum. The sense of I that I live with is a phantom. It's a mental construct. But that beautiful line from Savitri, a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. Our thoughts, our emotions are like a machine, but a Godhead stands behind the brute machine. And my truth is more truly the Godhead than the brute machine that I think I am. How do I live with this? So if I examine the way I live, there is a voice in my head which is thoughts, that's in the foreground. But in the background, there is an awareness space in which the thoughts arise and pass away. If I'm not consumed by thoughts, if I can sense that still background awareness, and I start paying more attention to that background awareness than the foreground thought, I start feeling an unconditioned joy, calm, and peace. Sri Aurobindo beautifully describes this as eventually all that is left of the personal soul is a hymn, of peace and freedom and bliss vibrating somewhere in the eternal. So whenever we are in touch with that awareness behind, the real self behind our mental self, we are invincible. Because we are not invested in the world cannot trigger us. Therefore, there's that beautiful line in Savitri, calm is self's victory overcoming fate. When we are poised in that awareness, we are not invested in the ego self, which swells with pleasure and shrinks with pain. The world cannot add anything to the awareness that we are. The world cannot subtract anything. Therefore, calm is self's victory overcoming fate. Again, Sri Aurobindo says, pain is the signature of ignorance, attesting the secret God denied by life. Until life finds him, pain can never end. So whenever we are in pain, it's a reminder to us, hey, look, you've moved away from the secret God in you. When we find that God, or move closer to that God, in that realm, pain does not exist. So let this be our practice through the week, to constantly pay attention not so much to thoughts, but to the awareness space behind. To constantly recognize the voice of the ego when it seizes me as an affliction, not my real self. And whenever there's pain, to not be controlled by the pain, but to look within, to find the secret God denied by life. Just with that, hands together in a namaste. Let's end with 3 Oms. Om.